What's up, guys? Today I'm here to talk about. I'm gonna use the Fast and Furious franchise as like kind of the example here, but just in general when this happens to franchises, and that is franchises that lose their identity. I know it's a very abrupt start, but I'm going off the cuff here. Obviously, Fast and Furious is a long-running movie franchise since the early 2000s with Vin Diesel and a majority of them with the late Paul Walker. And, we've seen this series for over 2 decades in making new entries, introducing new characters, and upping the stakes. And that kind of painted them in a corner that now, with what is supposed to be the last Fast and Furious entry coming up, Vin Diesel has been talking about returning to form. And that is because, if you've seen the whole series, you'd know that the first few movies are vastly different than where the franchise is now. Specifically, everything like post 5 is a much more, action oriented. Not that these weren't action films, but like they're doing things that go above the cars, and the cars are more so just set pieces to look cool in the movie. And, they use the cars to do cool things to kind of show them off. Whereas in the first few, it has to do a lot with like the underground racing scene and like tricking out cars with, underglow and that type of stuff. And obviously they strayed away from that at some point and then just kind of kept further and further diverting. They always had the cars in there and stuff, but if you watch just the first movie and then the last movie, like you'd be blown away that these are part of the same franchise, just given like the plot and everything surrounding them. Other than having cool cars, they're really almost in, the cast, obviously, there really is almost like no like relation between the two movies. And so that like kind of brings me to the topic is just like when a franchise loses its identity. And, he's come out, Vin Diesel being saying that with this newest movie, they wanted to return it to the roots. And it's almost like, I don't want to say too late, but for this specific franchise, I don't even know if people really remember the early movies like that. Like, if you saw them at that time, like you probably have fond memories, but I don't know if there's necessarily such a clamoring for them to return. And not that it's necessarily a bad thing. I just think that if they expect this to, going back to the roots of underground racing is going to bring on this huge revival. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I'm not saying it's not. Maybe I'm wrong and that is what people want and they just haven't been doing that, and him going back to the roots is exactly what the franchise needs. Maybe that is what it is. But it's almost as if like I don't think most people like kind of associate Fast and Furious with that kind of thing at all. There's more movies that are just kind of like the action adventure movies rather than, actual underground racing involvement. Outside of like the first three, is there really any of that? Like they race in some of them, but the emphasis is kind of usually on larger plot points, probably something with taking over the world or some nonsense. But they're just in an interesting place with this franchise because you are almost gonna like make nobody feel satisfied. I feel like by keeping going to the extreme, especially once they went into space. It's like, okay, how much more extreme are you gonna get? And you would think that going to the roots would be like, all right, that is the solution. But like I said, I just don't necessarily know if this franchise specifically, like, if there's such love for those first few movies outside of like, people being nostalgic for that time. And obviously, there's way more movies beyond those early to mid 2000 entries that I think that almost that they've just spent too much time in the weeds of like where they are now to really have kept that fan base. Like, I don't think anyone who, skipped out on a majority of these like the last 6 movies is automatically just going to be like, oh, they're back to racing, let me get back in there. You know what I mean? I think they've sort of lost that audience that they had. And I do think like okay, so what is gonna happen with this franchise? Like, are people gonna show up for the return to roots, or did they just kind of spend too much time trying to satisfy, the action audience that they developed? I don't know. It's in a very weird place, and obviously, people have their thoughts on this franchise, and it's not very well respected. I'll just say that. And I don't think that's very, breaking news right there. So that's the thing when he's like, "Oh, we're taking it back to the roots." I don't know if you had enough like hardcore fans or like purists, quote unquote, for those original movies that's gonna really help out in this situation. I especially, I think they've already like announced that they will have Paul Walker in that movie. So, whether it's via CGI, body double, or combination of both of those, like I don't know. I just think that this movie's starting off kind of on a bad foot with the talk around it so far, and there really isn't much. Like, this isn't a franchise that is like Marvel, where you have people online theorizing and stuff. Like, when it's out, people who want to go see it will go see it, and I'm sure it'll probably profit even at the box office. I don't think any of those movies really do bad, but I just don't think this return to form that he's like touting is necessarily the answer, because like I said, I just don't think that identity stayed with the franchise or continues to, carry that audience over with these newest movies that they've had. But like I said, I kind of wanted to use this just to talk about like when films go too far. Like, obviously it was a pretty niche franchise to begin with, and in order to like expand and evolve it, they went in a certain direction, and it worked for a really long time. So I mean, I want to say it peaked with Seven. Obviously, I mean, obviously the untimely death of Paul Walker also had some, effect on that. But overall, I am just very curious as to where people are with this franchise now. So let me know in the comments. Is this something you're looking forward to if they actually go back to the underground street racing aspect of it? Like I said, that on its own isn't necessarily bad. Honestly, probably a little bit of a good idea, just as like a send off. But the news about them including Paul Walker in it, there's very few ways that is done, in which I think people find it tasteful. And unfortunately, I think they're going to execute it in one of the many distasteful ways that doesn't exactly respect the memory of Paul Walker. And I'm not even going to say necessarily including him in it is automatically disrespectful. I don't know the thoughts of Paul Walker, and I don't think a lot of people, I mean, they probably have a better idea than us. Not that they're necessarily following that and, honoring his wishes by doing this, but I just think that there is a lot of like probably speculation and like personal bias when, commenting on that kind of thing. Like, oh, you wouldn't have wanted this. Like, who knows? Maybe he told him, hey, if I ever die, fucking keep pumping these out, even if you got to CGI me in. And we weren't privy to that conversation. Doubtful, but, who knows? But yeah, like I said, let me know what you guys' thoughts on this is below. I'm very curious just to see what the general opinion on this upcoming movie is, because I feel like they did a lot of things right by trying to return to the, roots of the franchise and reinvigorate it that way. Because, I mean, let's be real, there aren't really many underground racing movies out lately. So, there is a place for that. But yeah, I'll finally stop talking. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll catch you.